Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening to the depth of the internet from wherever people might be joining us. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon panel discussion at the Future of Work and Inclusive Growth Conference, hosted by Bruegel, the European think tank, and supported by the MasterCard Foundation for Inclusive Growth. My name is Fabian Stefani. I'm an economist and social data scientist, and it's my great pleasure as a non-resident fellow here with Bruegel and member of the Excellent Network to host this panel in this afternoon today. We've heard a lot of things about how technology changes the labor market. Very interesting panel discussions this morning and also presentations with Guntram sharing it here, and Monica and Carl Benedict joining us online. And the curious thing about technology changing labor markets is that technology or technological change is not skill neutral. That's maybe a kind of a bulky terminology that economists use. So to bring some clarification, what does this mean? Skill neutral means that it doesn't affect all skills that are present, that are applied in the labor market equally. So technology, and I think we can all relate to this either from our own experience or from research, is that technology devalues certain skills or makes certain skills redundant, makes them disappear that have previously been carried out by human beings, but at the same time it fosters new skills. It asks for mastering new technologies, whether we think about data science, data analytics, or augmented reality, or fancy new software packages in graphic design, just to name a few examples. And the results of this non-neutrality of technological change are tremendous actually for the labor market, and we see this. If I may do some advertisement for the work that we've been doing here at Bruegel, it's a paper that I had the privilege to write together with my colleague Rose Luckin in the framework of the Excellence Networks. And if you look at this paper, you see something, a common place of comfort for many economists, which is the Beveridge curve that shows, how the job vacancy rates and the unemployment rates have developed over the last years. And what you see there is, particularly in some sectors, especially in the ICT sector, tremendously rising vacancy rates. So there is a certain mismatch on the labor market due to this technological change, and there's a certain skill gap. And this is, frankly speaking, overwhelming many workers, firms, and also governments, not only in times of COVID, but also before and afterwards. And in light of this great challenge, researchers have thought of new solutions, and many of them have turned, or some of them have turned, to big data, the big data paradigm, to online generated data and data science methods. And that is exactly what we'll be talking about in this hour, in this afternoon panel. Can data science and online generated data help us on finding informed decisions, on closing the skill gap, closing the digital skill gap? Fortunately, it's not me presenting this here. I have the great pleasure of having distinguished experts with me here on the panel that I would like to briefly introduce to you before getting to some housekeeping rules and then embarking on the discussion. So with us, not in this room, but online, and I hope you can hear us right now, is Vladimir Grefton from CEDEFOP, the European Agency for the Promotion of Reskilling. He's an expert in skill trends and skill intelligence. Then to my left-hand side, I have the privilege to introduce Anush Megarian. She's a professor of learning sciences at the Department of Digitalization at Copenhagen Business School. To my right, it's Niels van Weeren. He works with Randstad, the staffing company, even though we learned that Randstad is now doing much more than staffing. I just learned in the beginning of this panel, before this panel. He's the head of data science there. And then Julia Nania, she's a research lead at MC Burning Class Technologies, a company that has specialized in harvesting online data and using it for policy recommendations. Before we jump into discussion, and I'll give all the panelists time for an introduction statement, I would like to get back to some housekeeping rules. You have the opportunity here in this room, but also online, to ask questions. In the room, it's pretty simple. You can just raise your hand and a microphone will hopefully in time be handed over to you. And you can also do so online under the code word work on Slido. I believe it's slido.com, and feel free to post questions there. We'll get to them after the intro statements. I would like to start with Anush. Anush, in your research, you are specializing on studying new modes of learning, how workers, in particular online workers, are gaining knowledge, are learning new skills. Do you see that these new modes of learning profit from new data and new data science methods? Yeah, I think that should be possible.
Display some slides.
Sorry, Flap.
There we go.
So, I have been studying how people learn for over 20 years. I've in particular been studying the learning practices and learning processes in workplaces, in many different organizational domains, in engineering, in energy sector, in finance, corporate research and development, in academia as an organization. And in the past 6 years, I have been interested in studying how people learn in new forms of work, particularly in online labor platforms and forms of digital work mediated by artificial intelligence technologies. And through all these experiences of research, what we find is that although modes of work are changing, and to some extent also skill profiles are changing, the fundamental processes of learning have remained the same. And namely, professional people in the workplace learn predominantly experientially. They learn through a mechanism which in learning sciences we call deliberate practice, that is sustained engagement in developmentally challenging novel tasks with trial and error, with periodic self-reflection, and importantly with expert guidance and support along the way. In the workplace, professional people also learn through self-regulation, through self-direction, through intentional, forethoughtful activity. People learn by observing and replicating the behaviors and strategies of other people in their environment. People importantly learn by solving problems in groups, in teams, and they learn by engaging in knowledge sharing and knowledge building in communities and networks online and offline. So these are fundamental processes, and we find them replicated in conventional work practices, but also in some of these new work practices as well. And to illustrate, here is some findings from a recent study we undertook on commission from the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Education a couple of years ago. These are findings from a survey of over 1,000 online platform workers in 5 European countries working on 4 different platforms. And those of you who are familiar with the kind of platform work context, these are kind of more higher skill task platforms such as Upwork, People Per Hour, etc. And sorry, this slide is a little bit crowded, but the key point here is you can see that the vast majority of workers learn through these kind of experiential, deliberate trial and error, self-reflection, acquiring new information through self-study, reflecting on their work, getting feedback on their performance from important people in their environment. And conversely, you can see that the formal learning opportunities are not as readily taken up. Fewer people take MOOCs, take formal training, and so on. And so we find that by and large people learn through self-directed, self-regulated, informal, individual and social learning activities. These findings are very much also replicated on the kind of lower skill end of the spectrum of online platform work, whereas here you can see the survey findings from workers on Amazon Mechanical Turk, also from the same European countries. And here you can see a very similar kind of pattern of workplace learning activities through which people learn. Now, going back to your question, Fabian, I would like to suggest that online data and data scientists could help close the skill gap by supporting individuals in self-regulating and self-directing their own learning and development individually and with others. For example, by developing tools and approaches where people can use online data to self-diagnose their own learning needs. For example, monitor labor market for in-demand skills and do so dynamically in real time. They could support people through tools and interfaces that allow people to enhance their own self-reflection, for example, using their own data and data from the environment to self-monitor their own performance and self-reflect on their skill development progress. Online data could help people make sense of the data and contextualize the data in the professional contexts that are important to the workers. Online data can help people learn vicariously from other successful professionals' pathways and skill profiles. And a few other ideas, then importantly, do so in kind of way that is portable and flexible, so people can move their own data across the life-wide and lifelong context in which they work and learn and live. So I think that would be my response to your question.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Anusha. And I think this, particularly this aspect of what you call self-regulated learning environment is really interesting, based upon self-reflection and monitoring your own skill portfolio, and then potentially this type of data allows you to say something about the skills that might be in demand for you or sustainable for you individually. And we'll see whether this logic not only applies to online freelancers, but also to the much broader spectrum of the labor market by looking at Niels, handing over to Niels. So we talked about the vacancy rates earlier. I spoke about the vacancy rates rising in specific in particular occupations like ICT jobs. And Randstad is, or part of Randstad's job is the matchmaking process. And do you think that these vacancy rates could be reduced, or the matchmaking could be improved, thinking about your own business, your own research as a head of data science with Randstad, with more data science methods maybe?
Let's have a look. Can you hear me? Okay. Actually, I'm interested in the question you're asking. So I would like to start perhaps by putting it in little particles. So basically saying, how can data science practice improve matching, right? Not only for IT jobs, but more in general. So I was thinking like, well, okay, data science. I mean, what's data science? Is it AI, right? We always like AI nowadays, or is it just good old machine learning that we had a few decades ago, right? It's been around. Is it perhaps also about data cleaning or data capture? Do we have the data at all to apply data science to? That might also be important, right? when it's about practice, well, I'm sort of representing part of Randstad. My team is a global entity and of data professionals. So I'm taking that perspective into the discussion. By the way, I should say I'm impressed by all the collective brain power here on policy making and macroeconomics. So I realize I'm just adding a little here from practice. Then there is this word like improve matching. So improve is like, what does improvement look like, right? What is improvement? And that's already a subjective thing, I guess. And then finally, is it matching or is it more than matching? Well, I'm going to argue there's more than matching. I already heard something from Anush, which I find very interesting, so I'll get back to that. So talking about, well, starting with matching then, you could say, well, yeah, Randstad is a matchmaker in the labor market industry. We're the largest HR service provider in the world, working in about 38 countries. Grown, like I was explaining to Fabian, from a startup more than 60 years ago, founded by Frits Goldsmeding, where he was mediating secretaries on his bike in a area called Amstelveen. It's a nice anecdote. So it was called Bureau Amstelveen. Well, it went pretty well. So he expanded to Amsterdam. Guess what? It became Bureau Amsterdam. And that was not large enough. So he expanded to something called the Randstad. Who of you who know the Netherlands is sort of the ring of cities with Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, The Hague. So it's funny. So Randstad is actually a geographic name, but now also a global brand. Anyway, and that's where we started with, and so it's about matchmaking, yeah, where it started. Data and data science obviously, play a part in there. I think we're all aware of that. So are we, right? So we've been applying data and data science in that area for some time. I think it's fair to say we're taking a cautious approach because it's not only about the money, I would say, but also very much about our core values, which is about the simultaneous treatment of, let's say, all stakeholders. So not only the company, but also talent. It's about ethics. It's about inclusion, right? So there's a lot of things that come with what you could call a good match, right? So also in terms of improvement, I think you have to take those aspects into, well, what you'd like to see improve. Is this a more ethical approach, right? Is this a more inclusive match, right? So those are the things that we try, right, also by learning by practice, to put into the mix. And is it working? Yes, I guess it's working. I mean, I think we're all aware of the potential hazards of bias in matching, right? Especially when you put a lot of data science. I think some big brands outside Randstad learned the hard way that when you train models on an existing populations of workers, then the model might reproduce recommendations for hiring that are very much like the existing population, right? It's almost a no-brainer, but still it happened. So when you want to create a algorithm, right, that creates sort of a fair match, also when it comes to inclusion, you have to find out, okay, what data do I need beyond my own data to represent, well, society, right? So so this is about gender parity and demographic parity that you have to put into the mix. So, and that's not trivial, right? It's really, you have to work hard for that. So again, that's where we taking this cautious approach. One of our chapter leads in the Netherlands, who's also has been working on information retrieval, doing a lot of work there. So that's, I think, for matching, you'd say, well, we're learning our way to improve. I think we're showing results. We're taking it step by step. We also have the AI Act coming up, of course. We're all aware of that. Matchmaking in HR industry is a high-risk activity, right? So, meaning think twice before you want to do that. You have to be transparent, right? You have to have an audit trail. It has to be, right? I mean, all the things you would say, well, that are natural with good matching, are now will be ingrained in the law. So you better comply, right? I think we want to go beyond it, adding ethics. So we're taking it a little bit higher. Interesting, as a side remark, we now have a data ethics board installed, also to help us in making decisions when it comes to ethical challenges. I mean, we don't have a recipe like, okay, this is the way, right? You make an ethic match. It's right, and to be honest, we're in a sense also, as Randstad people, a mix of society. So there's opportunists, and there's conservatists, and everything in the middle. So when you need to come to the decision, we said, well, let's put in a nice mix of people in a board, senior people, right, that have then the discussion about, well, for example, matchmaking. You know, what should be the ethical framework within we do that. So I think that's going from practice. Now, beyond matching, but we can put in the discussion, I would, for example, say career pathing, right? So, and learning. So my team is not only helping in matchmaking, but also in career pathing. So finding out what could be your next job, right? If you want to change, or you might be hit by the risk of automation. So we're trying to help there also with data products. Under the Randstad Rise Smart brand, we developed a product called BrightFit, which basically makes a snapshot of your yourself, right, in terms of skills. Then it finds out adjacent jobs that are, close to your current occupation based on overlap of skills. And then you need to bridge, of course, skills gaps if you want to move to the new position. And we are adding recommendations to micro-learnings. So micro-learnings that will help you in getting perhaps some certificates, etc. It's only part of the game, because you might also need to have some more social skills or whatever, right? But at least it's helping people to take that route. So in line with what you're saying, also self-propelling people, it's helping there a little bit. And there's more, but that might be for the discussion. And I should say, perhaps also to Julia, we've been working together already as we are using their products for some of our markets. So that's also really very helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks
so much, Niels. And I'm happy to hear that there are several cross connections on this panel that we might have not been aware of in the beginning. That's I guess a good sign that we made the right choice for this panel composition. Many interesting things that you mentioned. So the AI Act or the Data Act, I think we'll probably touch upon this in the discussion, I assume. But I really liked you giving the question back to me. What is matching? What is a good matching in the end? And also in light of what Anusha said, it becomes more and more apparent that it's about finding an individual matching. So the career pathing that you mentioned, I think this is probably going to be a theme that is going to be with us for the discussion and later on, how to find a good individual match, how to leverage the data for the good individual reskilling. You concluded by turning to Julia and speaking about your collaboration with Burning Class Technologies, or MC Burning Class. You really have like oceans of data, I may say, at your disposal. So over years, looking at online job vacancies, what do you think with these vast amounts of data? What are what findings, what conclusions can you draw on sustainable reskilling?
Well, Niels already mentioned one of them, but if I may borrow the clicker,
of course.
the data person I am,
sure,
I also brought
please.
some charts.
I thought so.
But I'll keep it very brief, just basically to just give some ideas of what is, like, we're talking about big data and it's all about the labor market. So I'm gonna, before I give some examples, just talk about a little bit, what is the data that we're talking about? The idea here is it's all about, we're talking about reskilling, about skills gaps, but the question is also, where do we draw our information from? Where do we base our decisions on? And how do we tell people, well, if you want to do this job, these are the skills that you need? And there are various ways, and we have found various ways of doing that, but one that we work with and one that this data set can provide is using job postings data and extracting from that data set, and it's basically using the language that the labor market speaks via the employers, saying, I have an open position, I'll post it online and I'll describe exactly what I'm looking for, using skills as the currency or as the language, if you will. And sort of that's And that generates that ocean of data that you talk about, because there's lots of job openings, lots of people are looking for a job, and using that and classifying it, it's all about tagging and classifying it and grouping it to then be able to make sense of this ocean. And that's sort of the key point. In terms of what this mountain of data can then tell us is a variety of things. And we'll get to the career path example that Niels just mentioned as well. But on the more general side, you can just track changes in the labor market as they happen. The examples that I have here is for Germany. Two examples. One is about AI skills, so it's very, very specific, but it really just shows you how specific it can be, how granular it can be. And then you can look at how the skills demand may have changed over time and how something evolves and which skills are growing most, and also which skills may be in demand the most, based on what employers are actually saying and putting out there and saying this is what we need and this is what we are looking for. The other example on the right side is a slightly different one, but I think I really like it because it shows how we can track employer behavior and therefore see, okay, something is changing in the labor market, so we need to react to that as an educator, as a policymaker, or a various, depending on what role you play in the market, is in this case, how more and more employers are putting the offering, or they're specifically saying in the posting, we will train you on the job. You come on board, we don't expect you to have all the skills, we will train you here. And this has gone up significantly across various countries, not just in Germany. And this opens again, relating it back to what you said about micro-credentialing and smaller courses, like there's a role to be played and like a possibility here as well, and sort of responding to that. Employers can't do it all on the job on a daily basis, but rather than sending them back to university, just to be say the extreme thing for another degree, they might do a small online course, or they might do micro-credential. There are other options there, which is a change in the dynamic. Something that maybe could even become at the beginning of this discussion about reskilling and sort of why is skill at the core of it, and it's something that we've found in that is also reflected in how employers present themselves in job postings, is that they're more and more moving away from degrees. They're not necessarily saying you need to have this specific degree, this specific field, you need to have a master's or a bachelor's degree. We want you to have these skills. We don't really care where they come from almost, but we want you to have this skill set, because this is what we need, what we think you need to do for this job. And that has an impact on how we think about hiring, how we think about training, how we think about policy making, and how it's even more important to think in skills rather than occupations, or maybe even in tasks further, as we heard earlier this morning. They break it down even further, but it's no longer necessarily about a degree or an occupation. It's about roles that are defined by skills or groups of skills and how that changes. And again, this is behavior that is not anecdotal or based on expert knowledge. This is what we're seeing, how employers are actually positioning themselves in the market. So this, which I find the interesting bit is it's a different source of information. It's sort of a data-driven analysis. And the final example that I have here, and then I'll stop with slides, is the career path. The career path that we have here was very much, this is for Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but the idea was here very much, it was connected to COVID and how it has changed, how can we help people find other jobs. But you can do this you can drill down to to a region specifically or to a specific sector if you want to as well. The basic idea is that rather than, like you say, using an existing training set almost, or like CVs, transitions that people have done before, basically proposing those same transitions again, we instead use skills and how they are and profiles associated with that, and to determine career paths, other options. So you use skill adjacency. If job A has a set of skills and 50% of the skills are also present in job B, then that may be an option, regardless of whether somebody has done that before or not, or whether we are aware of it or not. And that opens, that can open new doors that we may not be aware of. And it's also it's almost a more objective approach to it, because it takes the data and how we talk about and how employers talk about it, how they talk about roles, and takes away the existing the previous path, because we don't always know what options there are. And in terms of for reskilling and for career paths, that kind of helps us using the existing skills, seeing what other options there are for changing job, but also then using the additional information of, okay, what are my missing skills? What specific skills do I need to move on to this particular job that I picked, which may be more desirable because of more promising future growth or higher salaries, excuse me, or just because you're interested in a career change. And this, I think, is a very powerful insight that can be drawn from posting data or even social profile data, like these oceans of data, which are sometimes hard to make sense of, but I think they hold a lot of an interesting and a very powerful source to add to this conversation. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julia. And again, here, like a very rich repertoire of insights. So first of all, maybe one of your questions is already answered, Neil. So good old machine learning does a pretty decent job, I think we saw on the first on Julia's slides. And I find it particularly interesting to look at this idea of the degree reset. You know, that degrees are maybe becoming, in comparison to individual skills, less important as a credential on the labor markets when it comes to finding new jobs. It reminds me of an anecdote that, talking to the Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany, so I have to disclaim I'm from Germany as well. They told me that German employees still have a degree fetish to some extent, and they are very much focused on degrees. So they might have not heard the recent development yet, but this is definitely something I'd be curious to hear more about in the discussion later on. I would now like to turn to our fourth panelist, and that is Vladimir. Vlad, I hope you can hear us. Part of your work is translating basically what you find in the data, what you find with data science methods, into reskilling advice, into new reskilling practices. What are the current challenges that you and your team are facing on this translation?
Thank you for having me. And first of all, good afternoon from sunny Thessaloniki. We have something like 40 degrees, so if I don't know what is the weather in Brussels, but the similarly hot is the question you have just asked to me, because we know that talking about challenges is quite challenging. And the translation is of results to learning advice is challenging of its own. And we know that challenge is quite social being, and it never goes out on its own. And we have sort of three main groups of issues we are dealing with. And as EU organization, we are slightly on a top spotlight in terms of our key stakeholders, and the challenges I will be speaking now are driven by ethics, as it was already said today, inclusion, but also social responsibility and sort of costs, being aware of costs of bad decision. And the key challenges, as we say, are in three groups. One is the technical or methodological. The other part is interpretational, and then it's systemic. When talking about, when discussing methodology, it's basically about getting and capturing the data and make it clear to the users that the data are of really value added, and it's useful to use them, but also about the quality, because what we were discussing today is that most of these processes and algorithms which are used through AI and big data techniques are by the end users are considered to be a black box. But and again, as said, driven by social responsibility, together with Eurostat's Web Intelligence Hub, we at ZFO feel a need to make it clear, at least to a scientific or research data science group and data science society, that our machines and our algorithms are good, because we understand that building trust and putting some quality standards on the processes we are using are quite important. Moreover, what we are working with is, as European organization, we need to serve all 27 member states and ideally beyond. So we are working in multilingual environment, and here the key challenge is basically capture the national specificities of the language, of the culture, because what works in English in terms of even simple drafting job advertisements, or the words that are used to describe skills are in different cultural context slightly different, because for instance, as you were mentioning, Fabian, the institute in Germany, which we are also connected to, and basically there employers are using different concepts of description of skills, which is more task related, or more contextualized use of skills rather than skills of its own. So basically, this is quite important to keep in mind when looking at when basically navigating in multilingual environment, and not talking about complexity of languages, because if we are working with English, then the language is quite simple in terms of grammar and processing the word in terms of cases and declinations and stuff. But if we move to Slavic languages or even to Finnish, then we know that how the word is as such is processed in the usual language. This is we need to basically tweak our algorithm, taking this into consideration. So this is more about technology. And once we manage to go around these, then we need to basically understand what we are getting, because we need to make it clear that we understand and we believe that what is out there is actually true, because we know that education is long-term process, and which is affected by short-term decision or short-term impact. We need to understand the full complexity of the world, and we need to identify what is I don't know, a long-term trend as move towards digitization, and what is like short-term blip. We made some analysis of the effect of the pandemics, and we basically have realized that the main decrease of the posting of job advertisement took place in 2 immediate months after the outbreak. This means February, a few years ago, and then the return or kicking back of the posting intensity was quite. Posting intensity recovered. However, we know that there were some changes in the quality or in the skills requirement and the type of jobs which were posted. So again, we need to understand this information, and of course, we need to understand exactly what is something that we call skill and what is the tool, because here. We need to, especially in terms of digitization, and we need to make it clear what and how difficult it is learned, because skill, like for instance, building our algorithm itself, is slightly different to using a particular coding language, which again is complex but different. The time spent in learning it can be different. And again, we are working with human generated information. So we need to understand what is also not written in job advertisement and what is considered as a mainstream. A few years ago, we did some analysis and we looked at the use of mentioning of particular software or office package, and we saw a decline. But when we looked more careful in what we are talking about, this skill or this product was considered to be so widely used that it doesn't appear in job advertisements any longer, because it's considered to be a basic skill set of the candidate. So this is also what we need to understand and go beyond the data as such and bring some additional information. And of course, then slightly related to the technology behind, we have two main approaches. One is the taxonomy driven, or one is the data driven approach, where but in each of these, we still need to have some experts who understand the subject, understand the field, and to basically give us a good information and validate what is developed by algorithms. And of course, this has to happen across all countries and across all languages, because we think and we believe that there are some small national differences in terms of how the skill is used in the context of the job. So this is the second large group of challenges, and the last is systemic, because of course we can produce information, but the information needs to reach a right place and right user, and not everything what is produced by at the beginning by the data science is basically understandable and can be delivered in the way that final user can comprehend. So I would maybe follow what Anush said at the beginning, that it's good if data scientists could provide some advice to the individual learners and basically give them some indication what skills will be used, or what shall I learn. However, what we need to understand is a bit more than just pure data science. And here, again, the learning specialists, the people that understand what this skill exactly is about, and bring together language of employers, language of employees or workers, how they understand it, and also language of learners. So basically here we need to have a good set of skill systems, and we need to provide and establish good and symbiotic relation between individual actors aiming at creation and usage of smart and people-centered skills intelligence. So that's all from me at this very moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vladimir. And we see there's a lot of translation work that actually needs to be done before data is going to turn into insight and reskilling advice. So you're quite rightly challenging the big data paradigm. The data obviously does not speak for itself. Thanks so much for joining us from Thessaloniki and for teasing us with the local weather report as well. I see we have a couple of questions already on Slido online. I would like to remind people how this works. You can go on slido.com and under the keyword work, post your questions there. While there are some questions coming in, I would still maybe start to give people in the room the opportunity, maybe for one question to begin with, to our panelists. Yes, if we have a microphone on the left-hand side, that would be great.
Hear me? But they cannot hear me,
Yeah,
right?
I think Vladimir can't hear you then.
It's on though. Yeah, it's on.
Yes, here we go.
So thank you very much. Very interesting presentations. I would just have a very quick question to Julia, if I can follow up on this transition from degree to skills. I think that kind of caught the attention of many of us here. And as a manager in a think tank, I was wondering if this, or if you can see it in the data, how sectorial this is. Because I can imagine that somebody who is recruited in business, let's say, there we would look at, how fast they can find solutions, how many languages they speak, and so on. But in a think tank, maybe it's understandable that people look at more of the academic background, or maybe we shouldn't, maybe it's going to change, but for the moment, I think that's kind of the status quo. So I was wondering whether, in a sectorial aspect, this is important or not. Thanks a lot.
I don't know if you want to collect questions.
No, let's start with this one. I have a couple online, so we kick it off with this one, and
Okay.
and then we go, and then we collect the ones that we have online and see if we still have time. Please.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, you want to see if we can see in our data whether that movement from degree to skills-based hiring is happening everywhere or just in certain sectors. I think it also, the other question that I had sort of when looking at this was, there are still some fields where you need a certificate, you need to be registered as a doctor, as a nurse, or something like that. So it's not going to go away everywhere, and you're absolutely right, it is sectorial to a certain extent. And not everything is replaceable by skills, but I think especially in the areas where degrees are frequently all about the soft skills, the human skills of sort of critical thinking, things like that, all those transferable skills, if you will, if those are at the core of the degree, then it's more likely to be then moved to be replaced by specific skills, because degrees have been used as a proxy. So in any sort of and that I think to a certain extent even applies to certain research fields, or whether that you assume that if somebody went to university, they have done their research projects, they've presented, they've written their papers, and therefore maybe without realizing it have acquired these skills. So you may not find them as much in the posting because they assume they have them because they asked for the degree. So in that area, that's where I think they're kind of moving away. And we have seen in the postings that these soft skills, these human skills are coming out more and more. They're being a lot more specific about that. And I think that also helps understand in which areas and which sectors will be more affected by this. Does that answer your question?
Great. It would be great to have a look at the questions online, because there are quite some already gathered. I don't know, I'm happy to read them out, but I don't know, maybe we can also have them on the screen for people to see. Exactly. And there are a couple of them. The second one by Lucy, I would like to keep for the very end, because this is the core question, I think, but it's also one that I would give everybody on the panel the chance to reply to. But maybe we could combine the questions by Mohammed, Mustafa, and Davor Maskalin, where they essentially, these two questions essentially relate to what the current, let's say, conventional educational system, specifically the vocational training, can do to help people equip with AI skills and prepare them for digitalization. And at the same time also coming to Davor's question, whether the credentials that are provided actually by the educational system, that they really do not show up as skill signals. So whether there is a kind of a mismatch, thinking about the languages, translating between languages again, that the conventional credentials from the conventional education system are not represented by the skills that we're looking at here. I kind of feel that the question about the educational system, so how vocational training can catch up, is something for Vladimir, but of course with all of you having the opportunity to get to this as well. How do you feel about this in Thessaloniki?
Thank you for the question, and I think this is exactly this goes into details what we are working on also with respect to other our project, and looking at equipping of skills. What we necessarily need to understand is what these skills actually are. We ran a quick survey on the among job holders after during pandemics, and basically one of our finding is that many of these skills are quite easy to acquire, because we know that we are talking about digital here and digital there, but simple being able to attend Zoom meeting or set up a meeting or try to use a different communication tools is quite easy to learn. Of course, also in terms of bets and the processes, one thing is to capture what is the core skill in the job, in terms of I don't know, be able to produce a precise piece of machine. The other is the tool. Of course, it depends on the workplace, and then this is important to go and connect directly with employers. So again, I believe that there is a lot to do, and there are ways how to approach it.
Okay, so this sounds still optimistic for the conventional, educational and vocational training sector. Anush, if I think about your research, you look at people that are actually far away from this conventional mode of learning skills, of acquiring new skills. Do you think there have something that the conventional vocational training sector the institutional one could learn from these people?
Yes, the learning practices and processes that I listed, the experiential, the practices, they are not specific to these kind of online freelance, but this is literature in adult learning. We know from the 1960s, 1950s, and from an earlier literature that this is how most adults learn. Adults do not learn by in ways similar to how children learn, and unfortunately our educational systems and our formal learning systems are set around how children learn. That's because that's the kind of teaching that is familiar to most people. But in fact, adults, even low skill, high skill adults, there is research from Alan Taff from 1960s, a Canadian scholar of adult education, who has illustrated through extensive interviews with blue collar workers, white collar workers, that an average person invests between 700 and 2,000 hours a year on self-initiated learning around things that are important in their life, and adults do learn in this way. So I do think that these approaches are important. This is not to say that formal education is not important. It is important as a foundation for being able to learn, from learning some foundational knowledge, but beyond this basic education, what is really important, and that would probably be my policy recommendation. I'm jumping ahead of, but by saying that rather than focusing on training, the focus should be on creating an environment in which humans can exhibit, exercise, develop their own self-regulatory capacity, the capacity to self-organize with others, and our agentic abilities. And that is something we do in our everyday lives, but somehow we immediately go into these kind of pupil-teacher mode when we find ourselves in more formal learning settings. So rethinking the environment along the lines of how adults learn rather than how children learn would be my suggestion.
Okay, thanks so much. This is noted for the policy recommendations that we're going to conclude with. Maybe I would love to catch up with the question that Dava has posted. Oh, Dava, you want to speak out again? We might need you to have a microphone. Otherwise, I think Vladimir can't hear you. Please.
I think it's important that the message is not like, oh, degrees don't matter, forget education, or why did you guys all do your Oxford and stuff, this was all useless. It's not that. What is happening, and it's interesting to see statistics, that looks like US is much better aligned. My theory, really personal, is this is a clear signal to the policymakers on country basis where education and what skills employers need, it's much more aligned. And I would say here, because of entrepreneurial and US more private and more agile, looks like it's much better aligned. So I'm an employer, if I advertise with educational credentials, more or less I will get what I need. While it looks like in UK, I didn't go over the data for EU, not to make anyone embarrassed here, it looks like it's poorly aligned. And maybe, you know, UK education is more about what education is. I mean, education is not just skills, it's not just utility, there is much more to it. And we then go into democracy and stuff. So I just wanted to make sure degrees are not going away. And usually what data shows, particularly my advice for humanistic people in humanistic science, is just adding 1 or 2, literally, digital skills. And that doesn't mean you have to be AI expert, will suddenly open so much market for person. And I would say part of my advice to the policy, who I am to say anything, is if we start informing that side of the equation called learner about what these 1, 2, 3, 4 skills are in direction they're going, to the point I heard before, people have self-agency in terms of, I think what you're really saying is we all want to learn. We don't need that too much of a babying about it in terms of classroom and stuff. When we're young, we need, because we don't know, you know, really what's going on. But later on, it's more just inform people, and they'll make right decisions, and they'll orient them in the right direction.
I have the impression that Anushi wanted to immediately get back to this.
Wanted to comment very briefly on the notion of digital skills, and that's AI skills, digital skills. I think we are at the point where we need to think more than digital skills, because conventionally digital skills are about using a piece of technology to support your work or your learning. In an AI kind of mediated world, AI is not just a technology to use, but it is shaping up as an actor in the work process. So if you look at kind of cobotic arrangements in factory floors where people cooperate with robots, this is a core worker, so the machine is a core worker. What does it mean beyond machine learning skills, beyond natural language? What does it mean in terms of transversal skills? Collaboration, you know, we know how to collaborate with adults, other people. There's a lot of literature on this. How do you collaborate with artificial intelligence? What skills do you need to work in an algorithmically managed work practices? So I think that that's more than just digital skills, but there isn't a term for it, but I think we need to think more broadly than just how to use this technology.
Please, of course.
Really interesting. Actually, I want to point out to some research/consultancy we did for I think it's sort of advisory committee for the Ministry of Education, Higher Education in the Netherlands. So they let's say assess new education towards macroeconomical value, or whatever you call it, right? So what we did there is we looked at AI skills. So actually this was about matching supply demand, a little bit like you were saying. Education Institute thinks like we have to produce this curriculum because this is our view on the world, right? And the demand side, let's say organization employees say, well, this is the way we want to see them coming in, right? And there's probably a mismatch. So in this case, and we have done several exercise there, this was sort of new, like, okay, we start from scratch, right? And so if we were to define a AI sort of education, I think they called it like AI translator, very much already broader, like, hey, we have to bridge this gap between the geeks in my team and, you know, the CEO of SourceRight who has some bright plan on how to conquer the world. Somebody in the middle, right, bringing things together. So we look there at the broader skill set. So not only the hard skills like NLP, etc., but also like communication skills, advisory skills, skills to bring people together because you need a lot of people, ethical skills, right? So I fully appreciate what you're saying there.
May I say a very brief point? Again?
Briefly, yes.
Yes, and more than that, in the supply chain of AI, the learning, the skill needs for different actors in the supply chain, from data producers, data labelers, to AI designers, to end users, to managers who are managing the end users, the skill profiles and requirements, AI skill requirements, might be different, and that's also something we need to take into account.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah.
I have to tell you, it kind of breaks my heart to cut us short here. I don't know how we're doing in time. I would have now at least given the panelists an opportunity to address this last question. Yeah, I guess that's. We've one more question from the audience. Okay, let's two more questions from the audience. Let's collect them and then see. Well, it's difficult, because I would really love to hear these opinions.
Thank you very much, Fabian. We very much appreciate that you give us a bit of extra time for the questions. My question is for Professor Margarian. You showed us how most adult people learn informally, individually, and socially, so on the job mostly, by trying trial and error, trying something new, getting feedback if it worked, if it didn't work, maybe asking a colleague, asking your manager, that whole process. And then you talked about providing such an environment where this is possible. So this links back to the panel we had this morning on designing jobs in such a way where this is possible, because you need some sort of autonomy in your job to do this experimental learning. If you have a micromanager who watches everything you do, who tells you what to do it, or even an algorithm that gives you prescriptions on work instructions, then you don't have this environment where you can have this sort of learning. So I wondered, this design of jobs happens inside organizations, right? It's the manager mostly who decides what your job looks like. Is there any policy advice that you could give at what policy could do to support this environment of jobs in organizations, to support this sort of learning?
Okay, Anush, before you get to this, let us just collect the remaining questions. Mia, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll be quick. I was really interested in this decomposition of jobs into tasks and then using that to design these career paths. And I was wondering so for me, this seems to be that career paths become a lot more flexible. People will switch sectors and industries a lot more than they used to. And there seems to be this kind of information asymmetry. We see this now in the data, but how many workers actually know about these opportunities, and how do you envision that we translate this information of what a facility manager who can become a project manager, how do you envision that we guide people in this way? Because we saw earlier that some of this could be displayed, for instance, in online labor platforms, get this and this skills because this is in demand, and then you have higher job opportunities in the future. But the people that are likely to lose out due to technological change are not the ones that are on these labor platforms. So how do we get offline workers, how do we inform them and guide them towards these new, more flexible career paths?
Okay, that's noted. And one more question in the back.
Thank you. I was interested by the things about moving from degree to skill and the underlying policy recommendations that you suggest, because if we have to learn by skill and not by degrees, this means that we have to change the educational system, because at school we learn by degree, we don't learn by skill. And so what do you recommend for that? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Maybe I'll start with Mia's question on how do you communicate this new opportunity of individualized, reskilling career path. Nils, do you have any ideas on this?
Well, and again, you were pertaining your point to offline workers or not, right? So that's a little harder, I guess, than the things we have in mind right now, right? So in online, it's easier. I mean, you have nice representations, Sankey diagrams, all the possibilities you have. Yeah, I think, well, you probably, and thinking aloud here, I mean, you probably need something like job coaches, right? Or people that can connect also in communication to the population, to the target group, and have perhaps the tools, at their desk, right? Using it at that moment just to get them already engaged, crossing that hurdle perhaps. I just wonder, I mean, what are the major hurdles there for people not moving, right? Is it just that they're not too digital, right? Or is there other hurdles that needs to be taken as well? But I think a personal approach with something like a job coach probably might work.
Thank you, Niels. And I would then hand over to Julia, because you showed us this interesting slide about, you know, how degrees become less important as a signal. Well, how do we deal with this? You know, degrees being less important than skills. Many people still focus a lot on degrees. They even make like substantial financial investments on this.
Absolutely, and I'm glad it has brought all this discussion, because I think that's exactly what we want. We want to kind of think about different ways on how of doing this, and I think there are a couple of takeaways that I don't think we need to worry about degrees going away. What we do kind of want to make sure, I would say, is making sure that educators teach the right skills, and we can use posting data or like data, various sources to make sure they align with what Niels described earlier, that mismatch on making sure employers are searching for or looking for certain skills, but the people coming out of degrees may not always have them. So making sure we try and close that gap by sort of aligning the education side. And as I said earlier, the other point is then skills that may be used instead of a degree are skills that are taught in degrees. So it's not like your degree, what you learn there is in vain. It's what you learn there that is appreciated by, and particularly certain portions like human and transversal skills are particularly appreciated there. I think the other area of interest here is, and that's what Anush sort of focused on a lot. It's not only about the traditional learning, and it's not only about people coming out of school and thinking about what to do. It's also about, we all want to learn, and we all, the adult learners and the non-traditional learners and people who take maybe different paths, that sort of signaling also to them there are other options. There are various ways of reaching certain positions, doing certain jobs and certain roles, and that the degree is not the only way of getting there. And facilitating these routes, I think that's what we can take away from this as well.
So it seems to me that it's definitely going to be then a mix in the end. The degree still has a value, but the fragmented credentials also, they're added to this. And maybe then coming back to Laura's question, Anush, you already shared your idea on how to close the digital skill gap, and Laura responded to this. What's the policy advice on to design these environments?
Yeah, and I think what she emphasized is the restrictive environments in which it might be difficult to exercise some of these abilities. So I think the policy advice would be to focus on empowering learner with a continuous learning mindset, with a sense of self-efficacy, that people are able to shape their own environments, and if they are not able to shape, and some environments might just be too restrictive, that they have the ability, the self-efficacy, the confidence to go out of those environments and to seek career opportunities where that are more suitable to their dispositions and to their wishes. And we see in online labor platforms among freelancers more broadly, not just online freelancers, that a lot of people say when we ask them, why did you go into freelance work? Many of them say because they want to be their own boss, and they were fed up with whatever, with their boss or with the patterns of working. And so I think, focusing on empowering learners to emancipate themselves in terms of, shaping their environment to suit their needs.
And I think it also becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think about the previous panel, the more you have then gained these in-demand skills, the more you can negotiate and demand more flexibility to pursue further goals and reskilling.
Yes.
Can I add just one thing?
Yes, of course.
Because we are focusing.
Short,
thanks. So we're focusing a lot of people who are sort of already mid-career, or at least I also want to add the very young people. When it comes to policy recommendations, also teaching digital skills as soon as possible, right? I would say, of course, there's already programs in schools, but I think we can do a better job. I just want to refer to a colleague of mine at Leiden University, where I also teach. Feline Hermans, who actually came up with the brilliant idea to come up with a new program language called Hedy, coming from Hedy Lamarr, who was an actress but also an inventor. And it's helping very young kids to learn Python. Well, Python, I mean, that's sort of that's a well-known program language. If you have it on your CV, well, it's worth something. And she does it in a very easy way. Like you start very, very simple. It's also to do with the way, like young people, how they want really to learn at that age. So I think also there we might want to reinforce some of the existing work.
Yet again, another very incremental and pragmatic approach to
Absolutely.
learning. I've been doing a terrible job in timekeeping, unfortunately. I want to just quickly get to Lucy's question. I'll ask all panelists to answer in one sentence, please. Anush, if I may rephrase your words, you say like to close the digital skill gap is to focus on environments rather than on the training, right?
Thank you.
Vladimir, what would you say? One sentence. How to close the digital skill gap?
I think what we do here is looking at the skills systems and how the information from the research and labor market flows and what are the instruments, policy instruments to achieve it. So I think this does not apply only to digital skills, but all skills gaps. I think what we need to really work on are good national-based skills governance systems, how the information flows, and bring the information to the right place. That would be my advice.
Thanks. That's a long one-sentence answer. Niels, please. How do we close it?
Well, perhaps I should say start as early as possible, right? Like I just mentioned, and make it easy for people mid-career.
Okay, perfect. Julia.
I think all of this, it comes down to information dissemination, how we share it, so make it accessible as possible. And there's one example in Australia. There's a website where you can go, funded by the government. You can put in your CV or your skills, and it shows you a career path and other options. Just to give an example, things like that, making information accessible.
Yeah, more accessible, more transparent. Thank you so much for sharing all these valuable insights with us. Also online. Questions been asked here, questions been asked online. It's been a wonderful session. We could go on forever, but we mingle now and have coffee. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.